there are multiple consequences or reasons why discrepancies can be affecting marketing teams. I think one is it comes back a bit to those three buckets that we've talked about. Certain data sources can be very valuable for campaign insights, and others can be very valuable for budget distribution. If a marketer doesn't know on which bucket a data source falls in, they could be making, the wrong budget decisions. So that can really affect, the overall growth of the company. And then you also have situations where, internal teams are reporting on different sources, and then there can also be friction between different marketing teams, between organic, between paid, on who grabs the conversion. So that can also be a very negative consequence, because instead of everyone working together to grow the business, then you have this friction on what data source are we looking at, my strategy is not being represented fairly here, and I need to make a point that my team is doing a good job, and how do I do that?
Barbara, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to chat and learn about your experiences. The way that I kind of want to frame this conversation is, how can we help startups grow through data? You have a lot of experience in that regard, and obviously a lot of focus on different measurement methodologies. Where I want to start is just kind of foundationally. So when you work with a new startup, and you're kind of auditing their account, auditing their business. As you think about measurement, what are some foundational components of things that you think startups need, or data that they need, just to kind of get started?
Yeah. Yeah, whenever I'm starting a project, so one of the types of projects that I do most often is marketing analytics audits. I always like to start with talking to the marketing team and other stakeholders that need marketing data to make decisions. So I try to, in this first stage, understand what campaigns are they running, and what channels, what goals, what data sources are they looking at, and also look ahead on what other type of campaigns do they want to start. Are they looking into investing in SEO? Are they looking into doing affiliates or partners? So I use this as a way to map what I expect the marketing data needs to be, and what data sources need to be in place. And then after I have completed this first step, I usually start to look into the actual data and auditing that. But I would say, when I'm looking at marketing data, I normally like to put it between one of three buckets. I see, one of the buckets is budget distribution and allocation. How do we get the data that we need, the insights that we need to understand how much budget should each channel receive? Then I look into campaign insights, within a channel, within an ad platform. How does the agency, or how does the campaign manager in the company identify which audiences, which campaigns, and which creatives are performing the best? And then I look into data activation, or data signals, or ad platform optimization. What can we send from the data that we're capturing to the ad platforms, so they can understand which customers to target? And I like to always divide measurement in these three buckets, because I find it important to communicate that a data that is for reporting is not necessarily the same data that you're going to use for optimization.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I talk about that a lot, the difference between measuring something and actually optimizing or bidding towards that event. And that's obviously a big topic with brands that have longer consideration cycles, determining what to bid for and optimize for. And we can definitely get into that. Within those three buckets, though, spend determining where to put the dollars is obviously the most important thing. From a data perspective, for the most part, data accessibility perspective, that spend getting that spend data pretty accessible, pretty simple to get. I think in terms of the challenges, probably in the beginning would be more around determining the data quality for conversions and signals. Is that accurate? Or when you go through this audit, like with newer brands, what are the typical hiccups? What are the typical challenges you see where you're like, what's going on here? Is it the data quality? Is it crazy campaign naming conventions? What do you see most often?
Yeah, I think a combination of data quality and data accessibility issues. So usually, companies bring me in when they're experiencing one of these situations. And it's either like we don't trust the data that we have, there is a major discrepancy between the different tools that we're measuring results, and we don't know what to trust or what to use. So those I usually put either in data quality or data education, because in a lot of cases, the data is working fine, the discrepancies are fine, but they don't understand why they are happening. And then you have on the other camp entirely different companies where and they're usually like engineering companies, developer products, where they have the best data stack, they have fantastic data quality, they're using dbt, they have automated testing in place, but then the marketers can't access any of it because everything is very robust, like a dashboard they can't model. So in this search for a perfect engineering workflow or a perfect data quality, they end up excluding the people who need the data the most. And then that's usually products where I also come in, which goes like, okay. And then a lot of the times it's even talked about like building a separate stack for marketing. And I think that is not a great idea. But I would say usually these are two common situations that I see.
Those are really unique and differentiated situations, and I think they're both worth diving more into. If we look at the first issue, not having not understanding the discrepancies between data, is this at its core a data literacy problem? And is this something that you see more often in kind of organizations that don't have enough resources from a data analytics or engineering or data science perspective?
I wouldn't say so, because I think marketing data in a lot of ways doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think if you don't understand like the core of marketing, if you don't understand like user journeys, cross device, time to conversion, the difference between server side and client side, then it's difficult to understand if a discrepancy it means that things are working as they should because they're measuring different metrics in unique ways, or if it means that the tracking is not working. So it does, in a lot of these analytics audits that I do, it's a big part of the project is debugging and troubleshooting, because I can't tell for certain if a discrepancy is within the realm of acceptable or if something is wrong. So my recommendation, usually for these kind of issues is, step one is, validate the events are fine as they should. Then monitor your discrepancies. Understand what a discrepancy between Meta and Google Analytics should look like. And then if that increases suddenly or decreases suddenly, then you can go on to investigate, because it's very easy for data and marketing teams to be stuck in this rabbit hole of trying to always getting these numbers to match.
Right. And it also takes the focus off of just being a marketer and growing the business. I wonder, were humans making decisions with this data, and trust is an important component. The anxiety of looking at these large numbers and not trusting them is super stressful when you're managing millions of dollars and you're expected to drive revenue and drive growth with that, and you don't trust the data. Holy shit. Like, that is a big problem. And it's one that, sometimes I even think about, like, we're looking at these numbers, like, how can we actually trust that this thing spent this much money, or this thing had this many conversions? However, I also think that to some extent, discrepancies can almost be, maybe vanity metrics not the right term, but it's causing anxiety where if the business is growing, who cares to a certain extent. Like, do you see that when folks come to you that are dealing with discrepancies or dealing with bad data, is it a lot of times that it is negatively impacting the business in like a very tangible way, or is it more kind of like an internal anxiety that these marketers and founders are kind of facing?
I think there are multiple consequences or reasons why discrepancies can be affecting marketing teams. I think one is it comes back a bit to those three buckets that we've talked about. Certain data sources can be very valuable for campaign insights, and others can be very valuable for budget distribution. If a marketer doesn't know on which bucket a data source falls in, they could be making, the wrong budget decisions. So that can really affect, the overall growth of the company. And then you also have situations where, internal teams are reporting on different sources, and then there can also be friction between different marketing teams, between organic, between paid, on who grabs the conversion. So that can also be a very negative consequence, because instead of everyone working together to grow the business, then you have this friction on what data source are we looking at, my strategy is not being represented fairly here, and I need to make a point that my team is doing a good job, and how do I do that?
Right. Yeah, I think about that internally as well. Like, at my full-time role where there's certain teams that look closer at GA4 or they look at last touch. And then, like the paid team, we're looking at incrementality, we're looking at data, and then there's other teams like the social team, which is very concerned about brand awareness, impressions, and engagement. And there's definitely these silos that exist to a certain extent. And maybe that's okay. Like the social team should be thinking about how do we build brand awareness and focusing on that. I've, and this is still something that I'm in the process of adopting, I've kind of seen MMM as a really strong way to aggregate a lot of this stuff up, at least from a spend perspective, because if you have enough spend behind something, you can get a read in MMM. Now, there's obviously challenges there as well. But I guess as you think about the kind of like siloed approaches to measurement across different teams, do you think that is a large problem that requires solving? Is it okay? Like, what's your kind of read on that?
I think it's perfectly fine, because I think that falls within, camping insights. If you're looking into, let's say, email, you should be looking at data sources that make sense for email. And that's not necessarily going to be the same data source that makes sense for paid media or makes sense for organic social media. So I think, within a team, they should be using whatever metrics, data sources, tools that makes the most sense for the activities that they do. And I do think, using an overarching data point like MMM, or how did you hear about us survey, something, along those lines, is best fit for the budget distribution part of it.
So let's talk about that because I agree with you that different teams should be held to different metrics and should measure their activities unique to them. However, there's also, I think, different capabilities within different teams and different propensities to want to measure stuff in a sophisticated manner. From a paid marketing perspective, we're probably the most advanced where we're looking at different measurement sources. I'm having conversations to talk about triangulation, right? The PR team might not necessarily be thinking about that or care as much, right? Like there's something about paid marketing where we care a little bit more about everything needs to be measured. I see on LinkedIn a lot of times more on the content marketer space, like, hey, we don't have to measure everything. We just need to, sometimes you just need to do it because it's good marketing. So, but to me, right, right. Which like I get, I get, and some of the some of the top marketers that I respect talk about that as well. But I do wonder for some of these, I guess specifically if we can talk about for a second for non-paid marketing, right? Organic content, influencer marketing, content marketing, building, things that are building up that audience, building that brand over time. Do you think that we should be measuring that more stringently, or is it okay to not approach it in that same lens that we look at paid media?
I think, like you touched, I think paid media is naturally more data led. It's the nature of the initiative, right? From selecting a dollar amount that a click is worth to optimizing funnels and conversion rates. It is very much like a numbers heavy activity. And I think that's why it's important that teams can also own which way they want to go. I think it's important that, content teams or, organic teams have a way of measuring to understand, within the realm of expertise, what content pieces should they produce more of, what content pieces are customers finding valuable or leads finding valuable, which topics of social media posts are reaching their ICP, right? They're measuring different things, but they should still be measuring this so they can understand what to do more of and what to do less of. Does it mean that they need to get the ROAS of, or no, not the ROAS because there's not ad spend, but does it mean that they need to have an ROI precise per each social media post? Like, no, obviously, that's not feasible. Even with like right? It can be difficult to really understand the impact of organic if there's not enough volume or variation into the data set. But they should still have some signals, and those signals can even be qualitative signals. It can be, asking leads what articles they read, or, now I've just said something top of my mind, but, it can be other types of signals, but they should still have something that it helps them understand what is working and what's not working.
Sure. As you look at kind of, early stage startups that are growing right now, I see more folks thinking about organic as a little bit more foundational and even investing in that. And I wonder, just like, to give a hypothetical, right? If I'm a early stage B2B software and I have a $100,000 monthly budget, and I say, you know what, Barbara, I want to allocate 50K of this to paid. I want to do some paid search and some Facebook. I want to allocate 50K of this to organic. How should I think about measuring that? How would you kind of approach something like that where you have these two different things? Is it that we look at the highest level of, like, okay, are we getting traffic, are we getting, email submits, is revenue growing, and then we measure each of these different areas completely separately? Is it something different? Just wonder, like, tactically what you would think about that type of situation, because I think there's more and more folks that, and like even our team, which is more at scale, want to invest more in organic, but want to have a way to understand, like, what is the trade-off if we're spending less on paid and more on this, like, harder to measure thing.
Yeah. I always see, like, my general take is that the role of paid is not necessarily of a whole separate initiative, but it's more about pouring gasoline into the fire. That's what I always like tell clients. So if you're investing in organic, what I'm imagining you're saying is you're investing in content creation. You're investing in producing valuable assets. These are all assets that paid can help distribute. So in the end, there isn't that much of a distinction between the two activities. You can't really succeed on LinkedIn without a variety of content assets. So you can't do that in silos. Again, search, there's only so far you can go if the only thing you have is a homepage. right? You need to have use case pages, you need to have industry pages, you need to have, like SEO tools that you're offering. So all of these things are also necessary to make paid search work. So that's, I'm not really answering your question, but I guess, my answer would be those things are intertwined and they need to work together for page to even be successful in the first place.
100%. And I think that's kind of the point, and the thing that I'm getting at is that the paid versus organic mix is a really interesting one, and I think it's one that's worth optimizing and thinking through. I gave the example of a brand spending 100K, but let's, if we take the example of a brand spending $50 million a year, seven figure monthly budgets, those those folks could be over invested in one area or the other. They might have some, they have all the website pages that they need. They have a little bit of a social presence and they're doing paid, and then it becomes a point of like, what is that balance, right? Like, if you are, when you're spending seven figures a month, you're serving billions of impressions on TV. How do you think about trading off, okay, I'm going to serve 10 million less impressions on TV and trade it off to get a million impressions of high quality influencer organic content? Like, that's like a really interesting like thought exercise that I'm having right now and trying to figure out.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. But I do think the advantage of having, bigger budgets is being able to run incrementality tests and have a more accurate in the end. And then I would say I wouldn't be thinking of organic in the point of content production, but I would be looking more at the performance of individual content channels. So, looking at how organic search is performing, looking into, setting up control groups in email to understand the impact there, and look at it on a channel by channel basis.
Right. Let's talk about triangulation for a little bit. So, I think triangulation is one of those words that it's kind of like a hot topic and highly debated, at least on my LinkedIn feed. Just thinking, I think that there's one perspective and one approach to say that it's not actually about triangulation. It's about different measurement methodologies for different things, for different use cases. Mayur Sadra of Incremental kind of talks about that a little bit. And then there's another approach to say, okay, for any given marketing activity, and specifically paid marketing activity, paid marketing spend change, we can look at multiple methodologies to evaluate its effectiveness and determine what to do next. And then there's just folks that, aren't doing any triangulation or relying on last click. So as you think about that world, you have a lot of experience with this. You have so much measurement methodology and tools at your fingertips. How do you approach that, and how do you take advantage of these different methodologies and tools?
I think the most important thing first is what channels are you running, because I've seen brands that were pretty much only running search, and they had 300,000 monthly spend and it was all search. If that is your situation, then you're fine with using a click based model, because search drives clicks and usually they have conversions within the first session. So in most cases you're good on measuring that part. The question of triangulation or other forms of attribution is when you start to do strategies that don't generate clicks. That's when things get much fuzzier, is when you're doing YouTube, or even okay, Meta is driving clicks, but they're driving, cross device clicks. So again, using like a click based attribution model won't necessarily like reflect the results there. So I think in this situation, you must look at other forms of attribution. There isn't a cop out, because if you're only looking at click based attribution, and I don't think it matters that much like if it's first click or last click, right? The reality is that measuring anonymous users nowadays, it's so difficult that at times, yeah, most user journeys on MTAs are going to have one two touch points, right? So we have this belief that an MTA is measuring 18 marketing touch points, but most likely those 18 touch points are going to be split between like 6 anonymous users identified by whatever platform you're tracking in. So I think the issue becomes, yeah, if you're only using click-based attribution and you do YouTube and you do Meta, like I can tell you that click-based attribution is going to tell you that the campaign didn't work. So you need to have other forms of attribution, or you are stuck only doing one type of marketing because that's the type of marketing that attributes fairly on an MTA model.
There's a bit of a absurdity to this because I focused a lot on this. I've built out this really complex attribution capabilities chart for our team internally, looking at each of our channels, how what the attribution window is, what's being measured, and then you get into web versus app and you get into probabilistic data and model data, and it gets very confusing, and then things change and then new attribution models come out. And so there's a bit of there's this sad reality that no one really understands this stuff to a perfect level, perhaps, and taking the time to do so just doesn't make sense for many businesses. I want to ask a specific example about triangulation, which I'm seeing right now. So paid social channel that we spent a lot on over the years. We are driving to app installs, right? But we have a web and app based conversion funnel so folks can convert on web as well. Scan data showing, you know, high cost per purchase according to iOS scan, showing pretty high CPAs, blended CPAs that look kind of subpar. GeoLift incrementality test showing very, very strong lift, which counteract the results from the, and obviously scan has all of its issues. So, and this is kind of looking at, channel over the kind of same similar time period. So not a lot of change happening there. When you think about a discrepancy like that, right? And you're just seeing different reads, how do you know how do you know what to trust, and how do you think about approaching that problem of determining where to go next?
Yeah, that is a difficult problem because the discrepancy between incrementality and MMM shouldn't be that significant, right? That's on paper the whole point of MMM, to be able to spot the incrementality. So you need to validate which one is correct here. Like the scan data, that is faulty for many ways. So it is what it is, I would say. But I would try to investigate the MMM and the incrementality and why they report different numbers. Have you done only one incremental test? Because it could be something wrong with the data there on the DMAs that you've selected. So it can be good to do another incrementality test. And I think if the other test shows the same result, my recommendation would be to follow those results and see where it takes you. So let's say you can add a multiplier to your bid to where you're running this campaign, where it takes into consideration the incremental difference that is reporting. And if the budget on this strategy is significant, then if the incrementality test is right, then on paper you should see more growth, right? At an overall cheaper CAC. So that's the same way that, when people ask me, like, oh, how do I validate my MMM model? How do I know if it's working? Like, there isn't a way to really do this, right? There isn't a simple way of checking if the model does reflect the results that you're seeing. But if you follow the model on paper, you should see a lower CAC and more growth, right? Because that's the whole point of it. And if you follow, what it says, okay, the ROI here is 4. So if you spend twice as much, you're gonna get more installs, then that's what you need to test and see where it takes you.
Um, yeah, that's a great answer. I think that's exactly the way that I'm thinking about it and approaching this problem. And the in terms of coming up with a decisioning framework on these different methodologies. I think MMM is great as a high level kind of hypothesis creator, channel budget planner, like great at high level stuff. Incrementality test is a way to validate the results of that. And I think like last touch or deterministic or attribution data, click based, view based data is is basically like the most straightforward and frequent data source to make the subtle nuances and changes of. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. And I'll just give another example, right? Like, let's say you have multi-channel media mix and you run the MMM, and it says, okay, you spent 20% on Facebook last quarter. You should be spending 30% of your mix here. So you make a plan to increase the budget allocation to 30%. You do that over the quarter. Maybe you run an incrementality test, and then I think you use the attribution data as this kind of like guide throughout the quarter, because you're not going to get the read from that. You might not get the read from the incrementality test right away. How do you think about approaching that based on like the availability of data as you're kind of operating?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I should have said to your original question is your MMM model should be being adapted based on your incrementality results. Those two sources should be working together, because MMM becomes the most accurate when there's more variation into the data. So on paper, if your incrementality test is saying like bad ROI, your MMM model should be adapting to that. So it should be, yeah, like I said, like creating maybe more incrementality tests for that. And then regarding the question of, what to do as you're waiting for for results. I think in the end it also all depends on how nimble you are with budget allocation. I think that's the first question that I would ask, because usually what I see from my clients is that they're thinking about budget distribution once a quarter, and then within that quarter they're looking into within the different channels where should they be allocating that budget. So when you're thinking about where to allocate budget within a channel or within an ad platform, that's where the ad platform data is the most useful. And that can be click based, it can be server side, it can be white paper downloads, it can be VCR. But that's the kind of data that you'll be relying for your intra flight optimizations.
Sure. The cadence is really important here, for sure. And although a lot of MMMs now are selling more frequent calibration, more frequent updates, a lot of the folks that I've talked to, from Recast, Lift Lab to Paramark, are talking about how they're building this Cassandra, building this modern MMM to calibrate more frequently. However, even so, I still believe that like on a campaign level, on an ad level, like there's not much that you can do to take advantage of MMM there. Curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I've seen brands be able to distinguish MMM like brand and generic search. So perhaps you can have like a distinction like that depending on your spend levels. Maybe also like prospecting and retargeting for something like Meta. But you're not going to be able to get a creative level insight.
Sure. I wonder, so, you know, we talked about some challenges that folks come to you with, and I've highlighted a couple of challenges that I'm kind of looking at. I think an overarching theme and an overarching challenge that I have when looking at kind of mid to, I would say, mid stage startups that have grown to a certain scale, are operating at scale, and have to balance the short term performance goals of hitting their CAC targets, hitting their ROAS, with kind of long term brand initiatives. That challenge is where measurement kind of fits squarely to solve. Is that something that a lot of your clients come to you with? Like, can you talk a little bit more about maybe some of the marketing challenges in terms of like objectives, brand building goals that maybe clients come to you with?
Yeah, I would say that's a very big challenge. You know, how much does should a company spend on brand campaigns? That is something that, yeah, people really struggle to identify and answer. You can use something that I've seen being used and I've used for clients is using things like Search Console. You know, like you're running a brand campaign, how does that impact, organic brand search? How does that impact direct traffic? You can also do, brand lifts on the ad platform, but it's you can do geo tests too. So I think there is all these small solutions, but I don't think I would have said this is a challenge that I have successfully cracked. It's a difficult balance to, yeah, to find. And some of the times, indeed, it's more intuition, it's more where's the market going, what competitors are coming, what is the motivation from our customers to choose us. There's just also all these other like strategies and momentum that also affect how you think about brand marketing. So I don't think there is, I at least I don't have a definite answer for that.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I think about the idea that this challenge of how do we grow the brand and establish the brand maybe falls on the minds of the marketing team and the CMO. They have to think about that. And so they think, how do I solve this problem? Well, it's more brand marketing, where a lot of times what it might be is a product shift or a change to the way that what retention might look like. And so I think a lot of times we as marketers face because we are in control of the budget and control of the CAC and the ROI, we face this pressure of this number is moving. What can you guys do to fix it? Where sometimes it's not a marketing problem as much.
Yeah. And sometimes, with brand, it's not about being reactive. It's not about seeing what the numbers tell you and then making a reaction based on it. It's about understanding where the product wants to be and then using brand to get the company on that place. But the ways that I think the ways that I've seen brand campaigns being measured, because, obviously we do attempt that, geo tests, right? So DMA testing for YouTube or even for billboards, also doing, certain DMAs and then analyzing the overall impact that that has on sessions and then trying to estimate what the ROI was. But
But it's still, and I mean, even can control for long-term impact of things with ad stock effect. There's still, the nature of some of this stuff where it just is very long-term and it's just really hard to measure.
and they're both risks, right? They're both risks. You have the risk of not spending on brand, and that's something, marketers talk a lot about. You're only focusing on bottom funnel and you're not building demand, and then, your growth stagnates. But you also have the risk of companies thinking they need brand marketing when it's too soon, when they should be focusing on other types of initiatives instead. So it goes both ways.
It's worth, but it is worth like understanding and actually knowing that is a risk. I think about Alex Hermosi kind of talks about, instead of investing in the S&P 500, invest in the SME 500, right? And it's almost like, okay, well, I should put all my money in the S&P 500 because I'm going to get 10 to 15% returns over the long term, and that's going to be fine, and that's going to compound. So I should put the, couple $100 or $1,000 or whatever that I can invest every month into that thing and just be patient about it. But then there's a trade-off of, well, I could take that couple hundred or $1,000, invest it into courses, invest it into knowledge to grow myself, to increase my income, this type of thing. So I think it's a similar kind of conversation with performance first brand. Like, I'm investing in this performance marketing because it's going to get me this compound, it's going to get me this initial result. But I don't really know what the exponential effect of investing in brand or something else could be.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be the case. Yes.
Um, cool. I know we have a few minutes left. I wanna get a few hot takes from you. So one final thing, the determining the correct metric to optimize at a high level. You wrote an article about this where you were comparing optimizing for CAC and target CAC, target CPA to optimizing for ROAS. This is something that we're transitioning to, kind of optimizing towards predicted ROAS and LTV, and looking at that more holistically. As you look across your client mix and clients that you've worked with in the past, like is this a big challenge that folks are maybe too focused on CAC or too focused on like a vanity metric that doesn't actually move the needle? Because sometimes I see like there's certain changes that you can make in your mix that have just an immediate impact, and one of those is changing the metric that you actually optimize to, bid to, look at, care about.
Yeah. I think it's just because it's easier to start with CAC. When you're optimizing towards CAC, you're basically optimizing towards one event, right? You're counting the number of times that event occurs, and then you take all the budget and you divide by that. That is much simpler than trying to calculate the LTV and or the ARPU, whatever you're looking at for a single user. But when you, especially for like B2B, you have very different user types, right? Depending on what more your monetization strategy, you can have very different plans, you can have a very different number of seats, and obviously, any subscription product, you have the question of churn. You have certain users that retain for 24 months, and a user that subscribes and then cancels after 1 month. And if you're only looking at CAC, you're treating all those users as they are the same. So you could be very well leaving money on the table if you're not considering these user differences. So I think companies start on CAC because it's easier. And then when they're starting to think about how can I scale my budget while maintaining, efficiency. And I wrote a case study for this. Maybe that's what you read for a client recently, and that's exactly where they were at. They were optimizing for CAC because that was the first thing that they set up. But then I audited their pay meter, and I said, look, you have very different use cases that your product is offering. And then I went to look at some website data to understand what was the value of each use case. And I said, like, certain features of your product, people stay using it for 2 or 3 years. Where there's certain features, they use it once, so they pay to use that, and then they cancel. So if you're only optimizing for CAC, you're okay. Maybe you have a lower CAC, but you have maybe a much cheaper or a much lower ROAS, because the people that are worth the same, you're not bidding for them because you have a cheap CAC.
Right. Yeah. It is really, the more variability in the individual customer value, you see those changes magnified, which makes sense for like specifically like something like B2B, where you could have an SMB customer who's going to be worth, $1,000, $5,000 to you, versus enterprise, which could be worth $1 million. Like, and you're going to pay the same amount for both of those. Like, yeah,
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. And yeah, with them, with this company specific, they have a B2B offering too. And that part I didn't look, but that was just within the B2C, yeah, space. You had, certain keywords that the LTV was double digit, and then another with the LTV of, almost 4 digits. And that is just a massive difference when you're talking about, big budgets.
for sure. Last couple of questions. This is the Efficient Spend podcast. Throughout all the clients that you've managed and all the marketing spend that you've seen, I'll start with the most efficient spend? What's the most efficient spend that you've seen? And it can be very granular or it can be high level, however you want to take it. The most like the campaign or the channel or the thing that you saw that just consistently that drove amazing revenue, amazing results. Yes, like throughout your career, what have you was there any campaign or company that you just saw, hey, this campaign just absolutely crushed? Or
Yeah, I one time had this client. This was like almost 10 years ago, but they were selling content, like types of content for games. So I don't even know if they still exist in this like AI world of theirs. But their entirely growth was Google search, and that was the only thing they did. The founder spent like a couple hours on it a week, and they were making like 50, 60,000 a week on it, and that was just from just paid search. Turns out that they found a use case that was very high in need, and there was no competition, and then yeah, they really smashed it.
most inefficient spend, the biggest waste? Holy shit, I can't believe this campaign or this channel that you discovered.
It's a big list that I mean, obviously, you have brand search, paid brand search. Who hasn't heard of a client that was spending millions a year and then turn it off and then nothing changed? Like, I feel like every marketer has a story like that. I've seen some, yeah, abysmal results for Spotify. Like, really, like, yeah, like 6-digit spend and nothing. Yeah, programmatic. You can also have an open market with fraud, the weirdest websites it serves in. But yeah, there is. I think usually the problem is it will be more within like paid search or retargeting is where you think the numbers look good, but you just realize that they're just reaching the user right before they convert. I mean, performance max, this could be a whole podcast on performance max. I can go on that for a good hour.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like most of these wasted spend kind of examples come with brands that are operating at scale. Like you don't see it with someone that's spending 10K a month because it's like they would figure out it's not working pretty quickly. But when you're spending millions a month and you have this thing that spends 200K, you're like, oh, well, like we got revenue, like we're good. And that's where it comes. I've also seen obviously brand search ran a streaming audio test with Spotify and it completely shit the bed. It was like really, really bad. And like, by the way, their reps sucked. Sorry, Spotify, but like the reps did not know what they were doing. Yeah. And programmatic too. So yeah, a line there. Awesome, Barbara. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll link all the your website, your newsletter in the description. Yeah, it's been an awesome conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'll just also do a little shout out to the attribution course I organized. I had the first cohort that I did, me and Timo de Chow, and we finished it this month, and then we're going to have another cohort coming soon. So for people that want to learn more about attribution, we cover things like MMM, MTA, how did you hear about us, vouchers, and all the different ways you can measure marketing results.
Cool. We will link that in the show description. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the great questions.